All right, folks, today's lesson is on the Odyssey, Book 10, Circe, the Grace of the Witch. There's sort of 3 episodes in this one, but it's going to summarize the first 2. Aeolus and the Bag of the Winds, the Laestrygonians, and then Circe herself, who's one of the more involved and important episodes of the journey, just like the Cyclops was. So, without further ado, I'm going to read this. I just want to remind you that, remember that this is not the storytelling telling the story. This is Odysseus telling the story to King Alcinous, recapping his adventures. This is all stuff that's happened in the past. It's not stuff that is happening as we speak. So he's recounting the adventures that brought him to the point that he's in. Remember that we started with Troy. We went and he fought the Cicones, lost some men, got blown by a storm over the land of the Lotus Eaters. Had to bring his men back forcibly on the ship, ended up at the cave of the Cyclops, and now we are going to be sailing to the island of Aeolus, and then to the Laestrygonians, and then to Circe over here. So, actually this is her island, the island of Aeolus, which is actually, I think, I'm trying to remember if it's the island on which Napoleon was born. His name is Corsica, which is, I guess, cool. Anyway, let's jump to our story and start reading. So, Book 10, Circe, the Grace of the Witch. Odysseus and his men next land on the island of Aeolus, the Wind King, and stay with him for a month. To extend his hospitality, Aeolus gives Odysseus 2 parting gifts, a fair west wind that will blow the fleet of ships toward Ithaca, and a great bag holding all the unfavorable stormy winds. Within sight of home, and while Odysseus is sleeping, the men open the bag, thinking it contains gold and silver. The bad winds thus escape and blow the ships back to Aeolus' island. The king refuses to help them again, believing now that their voyage has been cursed by the gods, which of course it has. It's a fun little episode that, instead of focusing on Odysseus' failures as a person, focuses on the failures of his crew. He's given this bag in which all of the negative winds are contained, and he's sails home, but he refuses sleep, wanting to make sure that he can get there, and he doesn't fall asleep until he's within sight of his home shore. I'm thinking that the problem is solved, but as soon as he goes to sleep, his men have been eyeing this bag, and they think it's full of treasure, and they want to get a peek at the treasure, and so they open it up to look at the treasure, and of course it blows them all the way back to Aeolus' island. He's like, "You're cursed, I'm not helping you anymore." And so, according to the map, and I don't know that the map does a very good job of showing this, he goes from Aeolus' island here, well, probably back down, around, gets all the way inside of Ithaca, and then all the way back again. This island looks like a kidney bean. But next they have to leave. They don't have the favorable wind, so they end up going in a different direction entirely. Back to our story. The discouraged mariners next stop briefly in the land of the Laestrygonians, fierce cannibals who bombard the fleet of ships with boulders. Only Odysseus, his ship, and its crew of 45 survived the shower of boulders. It's kind of a big deal. He has a whole fleet of Ithacan ships, and this is where they all sink, fulfilling the Cyclops' prophecy about what is coming to them. The story is actually that they find this harbor that's next to a cliff, and Odysseus is nervous about the cliff and the harbor and puts his ship farther out to sea than the rest of his fleet, who feel safe in the lee of the cliff. But there are these cannibals, the Laestrygonians, who live there, and they drop a bunch of boulders on his fleet, smashing it all, and the guys are drowning and trying to climb the cliff and up on shore, and then they eat them, and it's pretty horrific. But it's a quick little episode that they decided to summarize here for you. The lone ship then sails to Aeolus, home of the goddess Circe, who is considered by many to be a witch. There Odysseus divides his men into 2 groups. Eurylochus is Odysseus' second in command. He gets mentioned a number of times in the story. I don't know that it's shown up yet, but he's kind of an important figure. Eurylochus leads 1 platoon to explore the island, while Odysseus stays behind on the ship with the remaining crew. And that's where we're going to pick up. In the wild wood, they found an open glade around a smooth stone house. The hall of Circe and the wolves and mountain lions lay there, mild in her soft spell, fed on her drug of evil. None would attack. Oh, it was strange, I tell you. But, switching their long tails, they faced our men like hounds, who look up when their master comes, with tidbits for them, as he wills, from the table. Humbly those wolves and lions with mighty paws fawned on our men, who met their yellow eyes and feared them. Now, this is, of course, civilization versus nature. We have these very, very terrifying natural creatures, wolves and lions and leopards, depending on your translation, and they're all tame in a way that wild creatures should not be, tamed by the goddess Circe. But it's a connection between her and nature that she has these dangerous animals living in her home. Humbly those wolves and lions with mighty paws fawned on our men, who met their yellow eyes and feared them. In the entrance way they stayed to listen there. Inside her quiet house they heard the goddess Circe. Low she sang in her beguiling voice, while on her loom she wove ambrosial fabric, sheer and bright. By the craft known to the goddess of heaven, no one would speak until Polites, most faithful and likable of my officer, sort of like polite, I guess, said, "Dear friends, no need for stealth here. There's a young weaver singing a pretty song to set the air a tingle on these lawns and paven courts. Goddess she is, or lady. Shall we greet her?" So reassured, they all cried out together, and she came swiftly to the shining doors to call them in, all but Eurylochus, who feared a snare. The innocents went after her. On thrones she seated them, and lounging chairs, while she prepared a meal of cheese and barley and amber honey mixed with Preminian wine, adding her own vile pinch to make them lose desire or thought of our dear fatherland. Sounds a little bit like the Lotus Eaters. Scarce had they drunk when she flew after them with her long stick and shut them in a pigsty, bodies, voices, heads, and bristles, all swinish now, though minds were still unchanged. So squealing in they went, and Circe tossed them acorns, mast, and cornel berries, fodder for hogs who rut and slumber on the earth. So she has this magic wand, and she taps each of them. She drugs them with a drink that makes them sleepy, and she taps each of them with a magic wand and turns them into pigs. And so all of Odysseus' men have been turned into pigs, which of course is probably significant as well as an image. What does a swine represent? What does a pig represent? We can go back to Animal Farm with that and think about that. Anyway, down to the ship Eurylochus came running to cry alarm. Foul magic doomed his men, but working with dry lips to speak a word he could not, being so shaken. Blinding tears welled in his eyes, foreboding filled his heart. When we were frantic questioning him, at last we heard the tale. Our friends were gone. And then it jumps into italics and skips the rest of the story of Circe and jumps straight to Book 11, The Land of the Dead. You know I'm not going to do that to you. No, I refuse. I'll read it to you, and then we're going to jump over and we're actually going to read it. I found another online version of the textbook so that you can read it with me, or of the story. It's not cool. You can't just skip the second half of Circe's story. Eurylochus tells Odysseus what has happened and begs him to sail away from Circe's island. Against this advice, however, Odysseus rushes to save his men from the enchantress. On the way, he meets the god Hermes, who gives him a magical plant called Molly to protect him from Circe's power. Still, Hermes warns Odysseus that he must make the goddess swear she will play no, quote, witches' tricks. Armed with the Molly and Hermes' warning, Odysseus arrives at Circe's palace. Circe gives Odysseus a magic drink, but it does not affect him, and he threatens to kill her with his sword. Circe turns the pigs back into men, but puts them all into a trance. They stay for 1 year until Odysseus finally begs her to let them go home. She replies that they must first visit the land of the dead and hear a prophecy from the ghost of Tiresias. You may recognize Tiresias. He's the guy from the Oedipus myth who is a seer who makes a prophecy about Oedipus growing up to kill his dad and marry his mom. He's probably the most famous prophet, the most famous seer of Greek mythology, and he's dead at this point because that was a much earlier story in the Odyssey. But Odysseus has to go see him in the underworld, and that's what the next episode is going to be, Book 11, Land of the Dead. But let's read what we missed instead of just having this enormous and important part of the story summarized for us. So I will attach a second link to a second document here, and we will read here. The difference in this one that you need to be aware of is that this version, which is a Fitzgerald translation just like the one we're reading, has been altered to have Greek spellings of names. So Circe's name, as you'll see right here, is Kirke, which would sort of be how it would be pronounced in ancient Greek. We're not going to worry about that. We'll just read Circe for continuity's sake. And because everybody refers to her as Circe, nobody's like Kirke. Even if it's more correct, it's not well known and nobody would know what you were talking about. So you can see Eurolocus here. That's how his name would have been spelled in ancient Greek. So for whatever reason, this translation, which I found online, it does not have the spellings that you would come to expect. Anyway, that's where we left off. At last we heard the tale. Our friends were gone, said he. And this is Eurolocus talking. We went up through the oak scrub, where you sent us, Odysseus, glory of commanders, until we found a place in a glade, a marble house on open ground, and someone singing before her loom, a chill, sweet song, goddess or girl, we could not tell. They hailed her, and then she stepped through the shining doors and said, come in. Like sheep they followed her, but I saw cruel deceit and stayed behind. Then all our fellows vanished, not a sound, and nothing stirred, although I watched for hours. When I heard this, I slung my silver-hilted broadsword on and shouldered my longbow and said, come, take me back the way you came. Oh, sorry, I guess that's the end of Eurolocus talking. Now we're on to Odysseus. Let's restart that. When I heard this, I slung my silver-hilted broadsword on, shouldered my long bow, and said, come, take me back the way you came. But he put his hands around my knees in desperate woe and said in supplication, not back there, O my lord. Oh, leave me here. Even you cannot return. I know it. I know you cannot bring away our shipmates. Better make sail with these men quickly, too, and save ourselves from horror while we may. But I replied, by heaven, Eurolocus, rest here then. Take food and wine. Stay in the black hull's shelter. Let me go, as I see nothing for it but to go. I turned and left him. Left the shore and the ship, and went through the woodland, hushed and shady, to find the subtle witch in her long hall. But Hermes met me. Remember that Hermes is related to Odysseus. Odysseus' grandmother on his mother's side is a daughter of Hermes. So he is a relative of Hermes, if you will, back through the bloodline. But Hermes met me with his golden wand, barring the way. A boy whose lip was downy in the first bloom of manhood, so he seemed. He took my hand and spoke as though he knew me. Why take the inland path alone, poor seafarer? By hill and dale, upon this island all unknown? Your friends are locked in Circe's pale, are become like swine to sea. And if you go to set them free, you go to stay and never more make sail. For your old home upon Thaki, but I can tell you what to do. To come unchanged from Circe's power, and disenthrall your fighting crew, to take with you to her bower. As an amulet this plant I know, it will defeat her horrid show. So pure and potent is the flower, no mortal herb was ever so. Your cup with numbing drops of night, and evil stilled of all remorse, she will infuse to charm your sight. But this great herb with holy force will keep your mind and senses clear, when she turns cruel coming near. With her long stick to whip you out of doors, then let your cunning blade appear. Let instant death upon it shine, and she will cower and yield her bed, a pleasure you must not decline. So may her lust and fear bestead you and your friends, and break her spell, but make her swear by heaven and hell, no witch's tricks, or else your harness shed, you'll be unmanned by her as well. I like that Hermes shows up, and when a god talks to a mortal here, he does so in rhyme. It makes him seem mysterious and different. It elevates him. This is something that the author did. He could have written the whole thing in rhyme, like some of those earlier translations, but instead he saved it for when the god is speaking. That's good stuff. Anyway, if we analyze what Hermes says here, because it's rhyme, it's a little more difficult to understand. He says, don't go in there alone or you'll get defeated. Listen to my advice. If you want to come unchanged from Circe's power, if you don't want to be turned into a pig, right, and if you want to save your crew, then you've got to sleep with her. This is probably what I didn't put in the textbook, let's be honest. And in order to avoid being subdued by her magic, you got to use this plant, the molly plant we saw earlier. And it will protect you from her spell. And then when she goes to hit you with her wand and turn you into a pig, you've got to be ready with your sword, and you've got to threaten to kill her. Let your cutting blade appear right there, right? Let instant death upon it shine. Threaten her with death, and then she will cower and yield her bed. So, like, this is the, where Odysseus is forced to sleep with her. Like we talked about this, like, I never consented in my heart. He says these kinds of things. But that way he makes her, quote unquote, his friend and breaks the spell, and then he's able to, he has to make her swear by heaven and hell not to use witches' tricks on him because she's a witch. Again, there's sort of that fear of witches, of women who are magical and have abilities to trick and manipulate men. She's a female adversary, which is kind of different from the Cyclops in a lot of ways. Anyway, let's get down and keep reading here. He bent down, glittering for the magic plant, and pulled it up. Black root and milky flower, a molly in the language of the gods. Fatigue and pain for mortals to uproot, but gods do this, and everything with ease. Then toward Olympus, through the island trees, Hermes departed, and I sought out Circe. My heart high with excitement, beating hard. Before her mansion, in the porch I stood, to call her, all being still. Quick as a cat, she opened her bright doors, and sighed. Quick as a cat, that's a simile. But again, it connects her with those lions, with those leopards and things that she has. She opened her bright doors and sighed a welcome. Then I strode after her with heavy heart down the long hall, and took a chair she gave me, silver-studded, intricately carved, made with a low footrest. The lady Circe mixed me a golden cup of honeyed wine, adding in mischief her unholy drug. I drank, and the drink failed. But she came forward, aiming a stroke with her long stick, and whispered, "Down in the sty, and snore among the rest." Without a word, I drew my sharpened sword, and in one bound held it against her throat. She cried out, then slid under to take my knees, catching her breath to say in her distress. Now, taking somebody's knees was a Greek sign of supplication. When you wanted to beg for something, you would grab people by their knees. You're in a position underneath them, a position of weakness where they're towering above you. You'll see this idea of taking knees many times in the Odyssey, especially when people are begging for mercy or in those sorts of situations. This just happens to be the first time we've seen it. It's a lot in the Iliad, so it's something that you would see a lot if you read the book that came before this one. I lost my spot. She cried out then, slid under to take my knees, catching her breath, to say in her distress, "What champion of what country can you be? Where are your kinsmen in your city? Are you not sluggish with my wine? Ah, wonder! Never a mortal man that drank this cup, but when it passed his lips, he had succumbed. Hail must be your heart, and your tempered will. Odysseus, then you are, O great contender, of whom the glittering god with the golden wand spoke to me ever and foretold. The black swift ship would carry you from Troy. Put up your weapon in the sheath. We two shall mingle and make love upon our bed, so mutual trust may come of play and love." To this I said, "Circe, am I a boy that you should make me soft and doting now? Here in this house you turn my men to swine. Now it is I myself you hold, enticing into your chamber, to your dangerous bed, to make take my manhood when you have me stripped. I mount no bed of love with you upon it, or swear me first a great oath. If I do, you'll work no more enchantment to my harm." She swore at once, outright, as I demanded. And after she had sworn and bound herself, I entered Circe's flawless bed of love. Now, again, this is, like, when you contrast what's going on with Odysseus here to what goes on with Penelope and how she has to resist all these suitors for all this time and does so and stays perfectly faithful, and here's Odysseus like, "I had to sleep with Circe. If I didn't, my men wouldn't have been turned back from pigs." I feel like he's always sort of got an excuse here, and then he sleeps with Calypso for like 7 years running. Whatever, maybe it's just, me using modern sensibilities and applying them to an ancient story, but I think it's, the contrast is there for anybody to see. Presently in the hall her maids were busy, the nymphs who waited upon Circe, 4 whose cradles were in fountains under boughs or in the glassy seaward gliding streams. One came with richly colored rugs to throw on seat and chair back over linen covers. A second pulled the tables out, all silver, and loaded them with baskets, all of gold. The third mixed wine as tawny mild as honey in a bright bowl, and set out golden cups. The fourth came bearing water, and lit a blaze under the cauldron. By and by it bubbled, and when the dazzling brazen vessel seethed, she filled a bathtub to my waist and bathed me, pouring a soothing blend on head and shoulders, warming the soreness of my joints away. When she had done, and smoothed me with sweet oil, she put a tunic and cloak around me, and took me to a silver-studded chair with a footrest, all elaborately carven. Now came a maid to tip a golden jug of water into a silver finger-bowl, and draw a polished table to my side. The larder mistress brought a tray of loaves with many savory slices, and she gave the best to tempt me. But no pleasure came. I huddled with my mind elsewhere, oppressed. Circe regarded me as I sat there, disconsolate, and never touched a crust. Then she stood over me and chided me. Why sit at table mute, Odysseus? Are you mistrustful of my bread and drink? Can it be treachery that you fear again, after the god's great oath I swore you? I turned to her at once and said, Circe, where is the captain who could bear to touch this banquet in my place? A decent man would see his company before him first. Put hard indeed to eat and drink you may by freeing my companions. I must see them. But Circe had already turned away, her long staff in her hand. She left the hall, and I guess that's in Circe's voice. But Circe had already turned away, her long staff in hand. She left the hall and opened up the sty. I saw her enter, driving those men turned into swine to stand before me. She stroked them, each in turn, with some new chrism. I got to look at that footnote. What is that? An oil usually having sacred or supernatural properties. So she's using some magic oil that's like a potion that's going to fix them. And then behold, their bristles fell away. The coarse pelt grown upon them by her drug melted away, and they were men again, younger and more handsome, taller than before. Their eyes upon me, each one took my hand, and wild regret and longing pierced them. Though the room rang with sobs, and even Circe pitied the transformation. Exquisite. The goddess looked as she stood near me, saying, Son of Laertes, and the gods of old, Odysseus, master mariner and soldier, go to the sea beach and sea-breasting ship, drag it ashore, full length upon the sand, stow the gear and stores in rock holes under the cover, return, be quick, bring all your dear companions. Now, being a man, I could not help consenting, so I went down to the sea beach and the ship, where I found all my other men on board, weeping in despair along the benches, some in the frame yards when the cows returned, well fed from this is another simile or metaphor. Sometimes in the farmyards, when the cows return well fed from pasture to the barn, one sees the pens give way before the calves in tumult, breaking through to cluster about their mothers, bumping together, brawling. Just that way my crew poured round me when they saw me come, their faces wet with tears, as if they saw their homeland in the crags of Ithaca, even the very town where they were born. And weeping still, they cried out in greeting, Prince, what joy is this, your safe return? Now Ithaca seems here, and we in Ithaca. But tell us now, what death befell our friends? And speaking gently, I replied, First, we must get the ship high on the shingle, and stow our gear and stores in clefts of the rock for cover. Then, come, follow me, to see your shipmates in the magic house of Circe, eating, drinking, endlessly regaled. They turned back, as commanded, to this work. Only one lagged, and tried to hold the others. Eurylochus it was, who blurted out, Where now, poor remnants? It is the devil's work you long for. Will you go to Circe's hall? Swine, wolves, and lions she will make us all, beasts of her courtyard, bound by her enchantment. Remember those Cyclops held? Remember the shipmates who made that visit with Odysseus, the daring man? They died for his foolishness. So now here's Eurylochus, who seems to be, he was Odysseus' most faithful servant, his second in command, and this adventure, combined with the adventure of the Cyclops, seemed to be making him doubt Odysseus. He's like, yeah, you follow him, you might die. Remember the guys who followed him to the Cyclops? How many of them came back? So we're getting sort of a complication in the chain of command here for Odysseus and his sailors with this guy named Eurylochus, who's starting to become a bit of a round character. When I heard this, I had a mind to draw the blade that swung against my side and chop him, bowling his head upon the ground, kinsman or no kinsman, close to me though he was. But others came between, saying, to stop me, Prince, we can leave him, if you say the word. Let him stay here on guard. As for ourselves, show us the way to Circe's magic hall. So all turned inland, leaving the shore in ship, and Eurylochus, he too came on behind, fearing the rough edge of my tongue. Meanwhile, at Circe's hand, the rest were gently bathed, anointed with sweet oil, and dressed afresh in tunics and new cloaks, with fleecy linings. We found them all at supper when we came, but greeting their old friends once more, the crew could not hold back their tears, and now again the rooms rang with sobs. Then Circe, loveliest of all immortals. Didn't he already say that about Calypso? I guess it's polite to tell every goddess she's the loveliest. If we learned anything from the story of Helen and the Trojan War, maybe it's that. Then Circe, loveliest of all immortals, came to counsel me. Son of Laertes, and the gods of old, Odysseus, master mariner and soldier, enough of weeping fits. I know, I too, what you endured upon the inhuman sea, what odds you met on land from hostile men. Remain with me, and share my meat and wine. Restore behind your ribs those gallant hearts that served you in the old days, when you sailed from stormy Ithaca. Now, parched and spent, your cruel wandering is all you think of, never of joy after so many blows. As we were men, we could not help consenting, so day by day we lingered, feasting long on roasts and wine, until a year grew fat. But when passing months and wheeling seasons brought the long summery days, the pause of summer, my shipmates one day summoned me and said, Captain, shake off this trance and think of home, if home indeed awaits us. If we shall ever see your own well-timbered hall on Ithaca. Now, I think this is interesting because it's almost like Odysseus has been... You remember the Lotus Eaters and how they all forgot about home and Odysseus needed to drag them away? This is sort of the opposite. Odysseus here with Circe seems to be somehow under her spell. Now, obviously, he's spending his time with her in every possible way, but it's like he's spent a year with her without complaint, without worry, without asking to leave, and his men need to come and have an intervention for him almost. They made me feel a pang, and I agreed. That day, and all day long, from dawn to sundown, we feasted on roast meat and ruddy wine, and after sunset, when the dusk came on, my men slept in the shadowy hall. But I went through the dark to Circe's flawless bed, and took the goddess's knees in supplication, urging, as she bent to hear, Oh, Circe, now you must keep your promise. It is time. Help me make sail for home. Day after day my longing quickens, and my company give me no peace, but wear my heart away, pleading when you are not at hand to hear. The loveliest of goddesses replied, Son of Laertes and the gods of old, Odysseus, master mariner and soldier, you shall not stay here longer against your will, but home you may not go, unless you take a strange way round and come to the old cold homes of death and pale Persephone. You shall hear a prophecy from the rapt shade of blind Tiresias of Thebes forever, charged with reason even among the dead. To him alone of all the flitting ghosts Persephone has given a mind undarkened. At this I felt a weight like a stone within me, and moaning pressed my length against the bed, with no desire to see the daylight more. But when I had wept and tossed and had my fill of this despair, at last I answered her, Circe, who pilots me upon this journey, no man has ever sailed to the land of death. That loveliest goddess replied, Son of Laertes and the gods of old, Odysseus, master of landways and seaways, feel no dismay because you lack a pilot. Only set up your mast and haul your canvas to the fresh-blowing north. Sit down and steer, and hold that wind, even to the bourne of ocean, Persephone's deserted strand and grove, dusky with poplars and drooping willows. Run through the tide rip, bring your ship to shore, land there, and find the crumbling homes of death. Here, toward the sorrowing water, run the streams of wailing out of Styx, and quenchless burning torrents, sounds like lava, that join in thunder at the rock. Here then, great soldier, setting foot obey me, dig a well shaft, a forearm square, pour out libations round it to the unnumbered dead, sweet milk and honey, then sweet wine, and last clear water, scattering handfuls of white barley. Pray now, with all your heart, to the faint dead. Swear you will sacrifice your finest heifer at home in Ithaca, and burn for them her tenderest parts in sacrifice, and vow to the Lord Tiresias, apart from all, a black lamb, handsomest of all your flock, thus to appease the nations of the dead. Then slash a black ewe's throat, and a black ram, facing the gloom of Erebos, but turn your head away toward the ocean. You shall see now souls of the buried dead in shadowy hosts, and now you must call out to your companions to flay those sheep the bronze knife is cut down, for offerings burnt flesh to those below, to sovereign death and pale Persephone. Meanwhile, draw your sword from your hip, crouch down, ward off the surging phantoms from the bloody pit, until you know the presence of Tiresias. He will come soon, great captain. Be it he who gives you course and distance for your sailing homeward across the cold, fish-breeding sea. As the goddess ended, actually, let's stop and analyze this a little bit. So Odysseus has to make all of these sacrifices to the dead to keep them from being a danger to him and to the living. And then he's got to sacrifice some animals, a black lamb, a black ram and a black ewe, slashing their throat. And he's dug this trench with his sword, and he's got to fill the trench with the blood of these things, and then the dead are going to come to drink the blood of these. This is kind of creepy. But he's got to hold them all back with his sword until Tiresias shows up. The first one who's going to be allowed to drink this blood is going to be Tiresias, that prophet, who's going to tell him how it is that he can manage to get home. He wants to answer that question. Circe doesn't think he can get home, and she knows that the only person who knows how Odysseus can get home, the only person who can foretell how that might be, is Tiresias himself. Let's see. As the goddess ended, dawn came, stitched in gold. Now Circe dressed me in my shirt and cloak, put on a gown of subtle tissue, silvery, then wound a golden belt about her waist, and veiled her head in linen. While I went through the hall to rouse my crew, I bent above each one and gently said, "Wake from your sleep. No more sweet slumber. Come, we sail. The lady Circe so ordains it." They were soon up and ready at that word, but I was not to take my men unharmed from this place, even from this. Among them all, the youngest was Elpenor, no mainstay in a fight, nor very clever, and this one, having climbed on Circe's roof to taste the cool night, fell asleep with wine. Waked by our morning voices and the tramp of men below, he started up, but missed his footing on the long, steep, backward ladder, and fell that height headlong. The blow smashed the nape cord, and his ghost fled to the dark. But I was outside walking with the rest, saying, "Homeward! You think we must be sailing to our own land? Nope. Elsewhere is the voyage Circe has laid upon me. We must go to the cold homes of death and pale Persephone to hear Tiresias tell of time to come." They felt so stricken upon hearing this. They sat down, wailing loud, and tore their hair. But nothing came of giving way to grief. Down to the shore the ship at last we went, bowed with anguish, cheeks all wet with tears, to find that Circe had been there before us, and had tied near by a black ewe and ram. She had gone by like air. For who could see the passages of a goddess unless she wished his mortal eyes aware? There you go. And so that's the end of that chapter. What I guess you want to pay attention to is this guy who died, Elpenor. Homer does this on purpose. They're going to the underworld. And as they're leaving Circe's island to sail to the underworld, we have a guy die. You know that Odysseus is going to meet his shade in the underworld, and we're going to get maybe an answer to one of those questions about like what happens when people die, and how does that transition from life to death occur. These sort of big questions that Homer engineers an opportunity for himself to answer through the death of this character Elpenor on Circe's island. So anyway, that's the story of Odysseus and Circe. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments or unmute yourself and ask. I'm happy to answer them. Hopefully you're enjoying the tale. We'll let me go over here. We're going to leave now Circe's island, and we're going to go to the land of the dead up here and meet Tiresias. So that's sort of where we're headed next, and we'll go back to our original book. And if the land of the dead turns out being short and frustrating, I will again go to this through that text, and we'll get more of the story. All right, thank you all for your time and attention. I'll see you later.